the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, hosted by 360 Energy. Welcome back, Dave and John.
Good morning, Lysandra. John?
Good to see you.
To pump it up a bit, Lysandra, after that last comment, I wanted to make it like we're ready to go. We're excited to be here.
And again, just always, it just gets worse and worse, the welcome backs. So today I thought it would be a good idea to recap our year. We started this podcast at the end of June and since then have had numerous guests, covered a variety of energy and carbon topics, and have formed an audience just doing something that we're all passionate about, being an educational resource for those interested in learning more about this industry. So to kick off this episode, what are some of the most valuable episodes for our listeners? John, do you want to start this one on?
You want to start, John?
Okay. I think the challenge for our listeners is that we have 28 episodes there. Part of me doesn't want to pick some out at one level because it might be appearing to downgrade some of the others, and I think that would be an unfair view of it. But I think, like anything, you've got to be able to pick out some points that are useful for people, and I think it'll depend what the listeners interested in. So, for example, if you've been following the markets, I think that the two episodes from James Williams about the spikes in the natural gas market, I think they could be really informative and educational, both to people who know about those markets, but equally to people who don't and need to get an understanding. And I've picked that one out, not because James is one of our guys, but because it struck me that is the kind of thing sometimes that is in the background of all what we do. And people don't necessarily take enough attention of it because they think it's just something that's there and nothing that they need to understand about. What about you, Dave? What do you think?
Like you, John, I think if you ask me in 15 minutes, my answer might be different because depending on what's going on around the world will impact how I respond. But I think there's such a diversity of people that we had involved. So from markets, as you suggested, to management style, which you're talking our management requirements where Bob Willard and Sarah Keys were talking. And then you've got customers like Samuel John Lennard's talking about what they did. And then you had suppliers talking like Geosource on technology and things. So if you're asking me, what do I think was at this time, because it will change in 10 minutes, I actually think the David Loiselle, the hydrogen thing, because I don't think many people really understand a lot or did understand a lot about hydrogen, and I think there'll be a lot of discussion. That being said, I'm not saying hydrogen is going to change the world. It's going to be a piece of the next solution. But I found what Dave said was really interesting to me, but also I think really informative to the marketplace. But there's so many, and I think Lysandra's question is, what is it for our listeners? That would be the one that I would think that caught my attention, certainly on that piece. How about you, Lysandra?
Yeah, so you both have kind of touched on things that are either currently happening or very forward thinking, current being the markets and forward thinking being the hydrogen. I do think some of our listeners may have joined us kind of later on in our episodes, and I think our beginning episodes are still really great to listen to and are a really good introduction tool to kind of what we do on this podcast. I think sometimes if you kind of dive into our guest episodes, it can seem a bit advanced on the topics that we're talking about. So some of my favorites are actually the energy and carbon business basics and managing energy and carbon goals. So that's our episode 2 and 3. So we're talking a little bit back in the day, but I do think these are really important. And I think a lot of our episodes without guests are really good tools for you to kind of get started in managing your energy and carbon within your company or your business, etc.
I'm slightly worried that June is back in the day.
Time is moving fast, John.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
So next year, when we're looking back at June, I'm going to be like centuries ago. That's
Yeah.
going to go.
Last millennium.
All right.
There's a piece that I hope it catches people's attention is that going forward, we're going to have to move very quickly in this transition. And so most clients aren't ready or prepared for that. And the session on how to work with academia and research institutions, I think that will be a piece that end users want to listen to, because I think a lot of organizations now are so lean, they don't have the research dollars made available internally within their organization. And I think they should start thinking and relying on or working with academia, because I think the marriage of business, academia, and government in combined efforts in concert with each other, I think that will be the play to actually advance things.
Yeah, so none of us have provided quite a straight answer, but that's because that's the answer to the question. I think the most valuable episode will depend on what you're kind of listening in for. And I really do think that we've covered quite a few topics across the board. So kind of make sure you're scrolling through all of our episodes and seeing which episodes catch your eye. So
It would be interesting to get any feedback too, Lysandra, from our listeners, if there's things that they would like to hear or any questions if they haven't.
And with any episode, all you've got to do, arguably, is invest 5 minutes to find out whether it's of interest to you or not. And then, it's easy enough to do. And 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes to find out whether it's interesting could be a worthwhile 5 minutes.
good point, John.
And one last thing, just to round this up, I think the diversity, not only of speakers, but also point of views of us on the panel here. So Lysandra, you being a recent graduate in engineering, John being in the UK, coming from his perspective, and myself running the business here in Canada, I think it gives everyone a unique perspective, not just one point of view, which I think should come out in these sessions when people listen to them as well.
So does that mean it makes it really important that people should take notice when the three of us agree on something?
Because that doesn't happen very often.
We can solve all the world's problems if we all agree.
Yeah.
So next question, Dave, this is actually a perfect transition, but what episode had the biggest impact on the way you think?
I actually think what John Norman brought into how the grid needs to change, how it's evolving, how it's not changing, and his point of view on how storage will manifest and have to make things happen because the grid can't do it itself. And because of technologies, I found it absolutely fascinating. And I liked that he called out regulators and how the market is set up and how we have to change. And he had an international perspective as well. He wasn't just looking at Ontario. So for me, I found John's they were all really great, but for me, he really caught my attention because of what he discussed.
Dave, would you say that that type of information is still important for customers to hear?
It is. I think the challenge, Lysandra, is we need to make sure they understand why it's important to hear. Because I think if they do hear this and listen to it, they may not understand the relevance on what it is to them. And I mean, certainly that's the reason why we're doing these podcasts, is to educate people. But what he addressed would no doubt have an impact on every company, most organizations. They just don't know how that impacts. And so our job is to try to train them on that, for sure.
Thanks for that. Now, John, on to you.
Okay, though, I think the one that has the most impact on my thinking was David Loiselle on hydrogen. And I'm not quite sure whether hydrogen is going to be a major solution, whether it's a distraction, or whether it's a forgotten hero. And I think it depends where you are, because if I look at the UK perspective, we have the challenger of going low carbon, and there's a big argument going on. We have the situation where the government appears to be saying the solution for this part of the market is to move over to either ground source or air source heat pumps, most likely an air source heat pump. And then you're thinking to yourself, but we've got a major pipework distribution network out there. Converting a boiler to run on hydrogen is not rocket science. It's boiler science, but it's not rocket science. And is that a solution? And then you talk about back in the day. If you go really back in the day, people got really worried about hydrogen because of hydrogen airships, because they blew up. And so hydrogen comes with this sort of spectre of it's very dangerous. But hold on, methane itself, natural gas, is pretty damned explosive. But we've learned how to deal with it and live with it. And I think just to open our mind up and say, what part will hydrogen play? Hydrogen may play a very important part, for example, in road transport, heavy vehicles. There's the possibility there. And I worry that sometimes as experts, and more often as governments, we hone in and close down on a solution and we lock into that, and we may not be doing the best by the alternatives are there. So that particular episode made me go, I'm not saying I've suddenly become a hydrogen convert, but it's made me think, got to think about it more carefully, and perhaps we've got to look at the options that hydrogen does offer. Because when it comes down to it, when we're getting our natural gas, we're getting it because of the hydrogen in it. We don't want the carbon in it. We want the hydrogen. That's what we've been using. And somebody's saying, well, I can give you a supply of fuel that hasn't got carbon in it. So we should be looking at it.
And I think, John, certainly, I think Canada, we have an abundance or a capability of not only providing, but we can actually export it. So there's even more of an interest in
Yeah.
Canada on the topic for that reason as well.
Yeah, and I think before we move off it, one of the things that's surrounding hydrogen, of course, is the colour of it. You know, is it blue? Is it green? Whatever. And there's been a number of reports out have gone, well, that particular model of hydrogen actually hasn't got a lower carbon footprint than natural gas. So why would you be going that way? And then somebody goes, yes, but if that's part of the transition model, that we get hydrogen used and then we clean up the hydrogen. So it's a big topic. Trouble is, it's not one that's going to be solved by individuals, is it? It's going to be the large energy companies, it's going to be governments and others that are going to have to look at that one. And I don't know if they are looking at it properly.
Just staying with that real quick, we've had conversations with Dave because actually what they're looking at is certainly in Ontario, it's a combination of the steel industry, the cement industry, looking at this as a total solution, not one company, not one sector,
Yeah.
but looking at the whole group to make sure this, if it can work.
Yeah, we need cooperative movements, shall we say, to make those things work. And that becomes the trouble if those individuals are all differently motivated by their shareholders and profit bases. What's it going to take to get them to come together in a common energy solution? But that's not to say we shouldn't be trying.
Right.
I think for me, the organizational sustainability with Bob Willard, he was our first guest. So Bob Willard was senior management at IBM, and now he kind of preaches about organizational sustainability. And for me, being kind of a newbie on this podcast, I'm still getting into the energy industry. I remember sitting in that episode and thinking, I need to do so much more research before I come to these kind of discussions. And I think, a lot of our listeners may feel that way when they kind of listen to our episodes. So I really, do emphasize our basic episodes too, if you're feeling that way, because that's kind of how you can build up your confidence to listen to our guest episodes and be able to keep up with the advanced information that they're giving at times. So for me, I definitely think that Bob spoke very well and provided a lot of really good points for organizations. And I think to me, that's important just because, as a new grad, I am looking at companies to apply to, and that's a really important thing for me, is kind of seeing where they stand on the organizational side, if they have any organizational sustainability jobs and roles. So again, I just thought it was a really good episode to kind of introduce that into companies and, how they can become more sustainable.
So it's great to have your perspective because you're fresh in hearing this stuff, and you'll hear it as a customer's point of view versus something that maybe John and I have heard or talked about for a long time. So it's great.
Yeah, at times I think I don't feel like a moderator. I feel like a listener when I sit with you two and then our guest experts. I'm kind of like, okay, I'm a listener right now, and I try to kind of see it from that perspective. So I represent all the listeners today.
Perfect.
If someone was listening at an executive level, what are the top 3 episodes you would recommend?
Okay, so the top three, certainly Bob Willard, Sarah Keys. And I'm also going to suggest, depending if you're a manufacturer, I think the John Lennard's sessions, specifically session 2, if you're looking at greenhouse area, I think, or the agriculture sector, Ed Tracy's piece. And again, I think you had noted there's things that we discussed amongst ourselves, which I sort of take for granted there would be value. But those would be the three that I think that would be applicable for me. How about you, John? What's your thoughts?
Okay, it's always great, isn't it, when you follow somebody and they've chosen some almost the same as you're going to choose. So you've then got to come up with something different. So yeah, I'm with you on Bob Willard and Sarah Keys. I think any executive should sit down and pay attention to those. And then I'm just going to throw a slight curveball in. I'm going to say, and then I think maybe our episodes on the importance of data management, because it's all very well having these strategic approaches, but if you don't have an underlying understanding of data and managing data that's required in this, then you won't be able to make it happen. And, you know, this whole thing, we keep saying data matters, da 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 da, and we're used to saying it. And I think we just have to reinforce it. What intrigues me, particularly when you deal with executives in the sustainability, carbon, and energy area, is they suddenly seem to have forgotten the basis that they use of managing other aspects of their business where, they want data, they want to know what's going on, they're looking for performance indicators and everything else, and they suddenly move into this area and they don't necessarily bring that same thinking. So that would be my three, because I think there's two there that really say this is how you should be setting up the direction of your company, this is the way you're going to have to answer to the greater body of stakeholders. And then what's going to make that happen is by having good, effective data management underneath it. So that's my three.
Well, I have a completely different three than both of you combined, so that's great. Again, I would kind of say if you really want to make the most out of our guest episodes and you're just getting into the energy and carbon industry, our episode on climate change and planning for corporate risk was a really good episode. A lot of times in our guest episodes, we're all on the same page that we need to move to a cleaner energy future. We don't outright kind of say it, so these episodes are kind of good to understand our underlying meaning in other episodes. Also, our climate change and its impact on organizational financial planning. This is especially a really important one if you're looking to see the future of how is your climate change plan going to affect the type of funding and loans you get, and even are customers going to support you if you continue without a climate change mindset. And also our COP26 episode. I think our COP26 episode is really good for all listeners just to kind of understand where are we heading, as a country and where are we heading, as a worldwide movement. So I thought COP26 really emphasizes what all our guests come in and kind of stand for, but gave more of a general broad sense of it.
Yeah, and Lysandra and I talked about this prior. It's one of our longer sessions, but it goes fast because there's a lot of material that's covered. So for our listeners, don't get scared away when you see it's 52 minutes long. It flies by pretty quickly for you.
Yeah. What was your biggest takeaway? So an aha moment from all of our episodes. It's a hard one. I know, John, I see your face.
That is a terrible one. It's funny, but it was on the geosource one, and the fact of the drilling techniques that are used, and the fact that they don't have to drill vertically, but that the drillers from the oil and gas industry don't necessarily have the skills and technology for it. And I thought this is really interesting because we often talk about people going from the brown industries into the green industries. And it just made me think, do we need a retraining program for oil and gas drillers to become geothermal drillers? Now, I know it's not a major aha moment, but it's something I honestly hadn't even thought about. So that sort of woke me up to that one. And I also thought with that one, the idea of them dealing with small footprint, multi-story buildings, the idea that you can get the spread that you want by drilling it, spreading out your drilling. I'm sure there might be some interesting legal rights as to whose land you're drilling under and everything else. But again, made it really interesting.
I thought the Ed Tracy, where he talked about the agriculture sector / retail sector, has been dealing with climate change for years, meaning weather patterns impact them all the time. So this is kind of standard fare. That surprised me, but it doesn't, because he's right. Weather impacts farmers all the time. So that was kind of wow. So the retail sector should be inclined to understand the changes going on, because they've been doing it for years. They should be well positioned. I thought Ed's take on how Canada and the US is so different on the regulatory thing, there's a lot of things that he brought up that, we've talked about, where he said, well, customers are so surprised that actually energy is controllable. So when he said it versus us saying it, I didn't expect that to come from that sector, but I found it quite informative on the agriculture side.
For me, this whole 28 episode journey has kind of been a big aha moment, just because, especially when we have guests on, there's that saying, never be the smartest person in the room. You always want to surround yourself with people that kind of know more than you, so it helps you grow. I think when we have these guests on, they're the smartest person in our room on that topic, right? So we learned so much about that topic from them. And I think that's kind of been my biggest aha moment, is that we're all not going to be experts at everything. And it's very important to start those conversations with experts so that we can learn from the best of the best on these topics.
I love what I do because every day is different. And so I think John and I would share the same thing. John and I've been in the business for a few years, and there's always something new. There's always something that we're learning. So I find that we're very fortunate to be in the situation we're in.
Yeah, I think as well on that sometimes things come around another time, like in fashion, things come back. But the big thing is that sometimes when something comes back, that the whole basis of how it may be looked at changes. And I mean, a simple thing on that, thinking how things go, is when you're looking at cogeneration. I mean, at one time with cogeneration, it was very difficult to know how to manage it and everything else. Now you drop computer technology on that and microprocessors and everything else, and suddenly now you can look at an option that may not have been viable 20 years ago for some reasons, and not of the main technology, but the ancillary technology. It becomes something that you can look at. And I think you have to be prepared to always to re-evaluate what we think is standard. Discussing things, but from a position about, I don't want to be right. I want to learn something from it, or I hope my expressing of an opinion on something might help somebody else to form their opinion of. That's an important part of what we've been doing, over this extended period since June.
Yeah, and I think just talking about the 2050 clean goal, right? The only way that we're ever going to reach that is if everyone starts talking to experts in different areas, right?
Yeah.
So you two are experts at energy management and experts at so many things, energy and carbon, right? So people come to you for that. And when we start talking about, clean energy technologies and other things that will help us get to that goal, we're going to always be going to the next expert. I think that's really important for any organization listening, is if you find that you're struggling in an area, I think it's time to talk to an expert. So that leads me to our last question of this episode. What lesson do you hope listeners take away from listening to our first 28 episodes?
They have the expression, it's good to talk. I think the lesson that they take away from our one, it could be good to listen. If you can find a time to listen to one of our podcasts or all of them, it will not be time that's wasted.
Layering on to what John said, this is a continuous knowledge learning that I think the marketplace, it doesn't matter who you are. If we're going to make a change, and Lysandra, we talked about this in COP26, and we have to make a change quickly, we need more people to be aware and understand. So yes, experts are required, but we need to bring the general public up to speed quickly so they can play a role. I think far too often we've siloed this to make it someone's specific job. And so hopefully the material we're covered is so diverse, but the only way we're going to make headway is for each individual to play a role to make a change. And so hopefully this knowledge or transfer that we're hoping to provide will help them in that piece going forward.
Yeah, I think my point definitely is that you don't need to be in the energy and carbon industry to listen to our episodes. In fact, we don't even want you to be in the energy and carbon industry solely because that's not our point of all these episodes, right? Our point is that we want anybody in any type of department to be able to listen to these episodes because energy and carbon is going to be everybody's problem in just a couple years. So give these episodes a shot. And if they seem like they're advanced, move on to a different episode. We have quite a different range in how in depth they go. Also, for me, when I listen to an episode and I don't understand one thing they say, I pause it, I Google it, I learn about it, and I get back to the episode. We all have a responsibility to learn more about energy and carbon, and I think this podcast is a good bet.
I encourage feedback from people listening. It doesn't matter where they are. Like we have followers in Europe, we have followers in the United States, wherever they might be. Any feedback or questions?
Yeah, I think given that these podcasts are free, they do represent fantastic value for money.
Maybe if we charged, maybe that would make a difference. Yeah.
Oh, do you think we'd get more listeners if we started charging?
There's something to be said about that, John.
But seriously, if you think about that, to hear some of the experts that we've had on, you might have to pay some serious money to attend a conference or something like that. And so I joke about them being free and being good value for money. You've got this amazing resource of information on tap as you want it at no cost.
Going forward, we're actually going to up our game. I think we're going to even have more topics that will be valuable, but I also think we'll have some additional leading experts, even well-known names around the world that we'll be interviewing going forward. So I'm encouraging people to continue to listen as we go forward, because I think we might have some surprises, some of the guests that we're going to have in the future.
Well, thank you for ending off this episode for me. I wanted to say a thank you to all of our guests that have joined us along this journey, and a big thank you to our listeners for supporting us as we kind of manage this podcast industry. I want to thank Dave and John. Thanks for talking to me every week, and I hope you both have a happy new year.
Lysandra, this wouldn't happen without you. Just for our listeners, so everyone understands, Lysandra gets everything organized. She gets all the questions sorted out. John and I just show up and she asks and talk. So again, this wouldn't be possible without the team there. So thank you, Lysandra, for taking this on. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
You sound like you were accepting the Oscar. You didn't talk about your mother and father and the family at home.
That's next year, John.
Yeah.
All right. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune into our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. See you next week.